We are going to be reading the text, A Monster's Lot is Merry, by the author Jack Prelutsky. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Jack Prelutsky before. Good! Jack Prelutsky has written a variety of poems, and they're usually very humorous. Dante, could you tell me what type of genre this text is? If you agree with Dante that this text is poetry, clap 2 times. Our goal or purpose is to monitor while we read and look for figurative language. Julia, could you give me an example of figurative language? Very good. Similes, metaphors, and alliterations are all examples of figurative language. As I read the poem now, I want you to actively listen for my fluent reading. A monster's lot is merry. A monster's lot is merry in the melancholy swamp. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp. What a lark it is to muddle in the middle of the murk, making nauseating noises, driving birds a bit berserk. There is nothing quite so pleasant as a solitary trudge through the wretched desolation of the pestilential sludge. How divine to wade and wallow! And I find I never tire of distressing little fishes as I dive beneath the mire. It's despicably delicious to disport about the bogs, making disconcerting faces, discombobulating frogs. I consider as I slither through an endless sea of slime. Though a monster's lot is merry, so I'm merry all the time. Devin, what did you notice about my fluent reading? Yes, I read the poem at an even rate and raised my voice up and down, which is also called intonation. Peter, did you notice anything else about my fluent reading? Right. I figured out words or decoded words that were difficult for me. Listen more specifically now for alliterations and rhyming patterns as I read the first stanza of the poem again. I am going to use red, yellow, and green markers to help me monitor while I read. Did I scare you? A monster's lot is merry. Merry. I know that can mean happy or fun, like Merry Christmas, but a monster's not happy or fun. That is confusing, so I'm going to put a red dot next to the title. A monster's lot is merry. Oh, that's the title. I'm still confused, so I'm going to put a red dot next to that line. In the melancholy swamp. I am not sure what the word melancholy means, so I'm going to put a red dot above that word. A monster's lot is merry in the melancholy swamp. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp. Frolic. That means to run around and play. So maybe the monster's happy because in the swamp he can move around and have fun. I am still a little unsure, so I'm going to put a yellow dot after that line. Oh, I just noticed that swamp from the second line and romp from the fourth line rhyme. So I'm going to put stars next to those words. A monster's lot is merry in the melancholy swamp. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp. What a lark it is to muddle. Lark? I have never heard of that word before. I'm going to put a red dot above that word. Muddle reminds me of mud, which is messy. So muddle must mean messy. A monster's lot is merry in the melancholy swamp. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp. What a lark it is to muddle in the middle of the murk. So I picture the monster moving around in the mud and having fun, and he's being offensive or mean in his mud. That makes sense to me, so I'm going to put a green dot after that line. A monster's lot is merry in the melancholy swamp. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp. What a lark it is to muddle in the middle of the murk, making nauseating noises. Two N's. That must be an alliteration. Nauseating was a difficult word to sound out. I think it means gross, so I'm going to put a yellow dot above it because I am unsure. A monster's lot is merry in the melancholy swamp. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp. What a lark it is to muddle in the middle of the murk, making nauseating noises, driving birds a bit berserk. Hey, berserk and murk rhyme. I'm going to put a star by those words. And birds a bit berserk. That must be an alliteration as well because there are 3 B's. So I am visualizing that the monster is in his happy swamp, moving around, making a mess, having fun and being offensive or mean, making gross noises, and the birds are going crazy because of it. While I read, I noticed an alliteration in the first stanza. Can anyone find it? Aha! Nauseating noises. The beginning sounds repeat in an alliteration. There were a variety of examples of alliterations in this poem. Talk to your elbow partner about one of the alliterations that you heard me read during the first stanza. I was confused after the sentence, what a lark it is to muddle, and I put a red dot next to it. There were some vocabulary words that I wasn't sure about. How could we figure out what the word lark means? Great, Julia! We could look back in the poem and use context clues to help us. We could also make a picture of the poem in our head. So lark might mean that it is fun to play in the mud. I put a yellow dot next to the sentence. Here I'm free to be offensive, free to frolic, free to romp, because I understood most of the vocabulary words and I understood the meaning of the sentence, but I was still unsure about the word frolic. After I read through the rest of the first stanza, it helped me figure out what the word frolic means. I also noticed some rhyming words while I was reading, and I put a star next to them. Dante, point out 2 of the words that rhymed in the first stanza. Good, swamp and romp. If you notice, I had a hard time decoding or sounding out the word nauseating, and I had to go back and reread to help me. After reading the first stanza, I went back and I made a mental picture of what I thought the monster was doing in the swamp. That helped me figure out what the author was trying to say. I also noticed that the author rhymes the last word in every other line. If you notice that, put 2 thumbs up. While reading, it is important to notice the words that rhyme within the poem. Now that I have modeled reading one of the Jack Prelutsky poems, you are going to choose one of the other Jack Prelutsky poems that I have provided. The goal or purpose of our reading is to use the stoplights with red, yellow, and green markers to monitor while we read and to figure out the author's rhyming pattern. We also want to look for alliterations. I demonstrated how to use the monitoring stoplights, so I want you to place a dot next to a word or sentence after each line. I want you to place a red dot next to a word or sentence that you don't understand. I want you to place a yellow dot next to a word or sentence that is a little confusing to you. And I want you to place a green dot next to a word or phrase that you understand. Lastly, I want you to place stars next to 2 words that rhyme. Make sure that you look out for difficult vocabulary words. Go ahead and read.